Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Microsoft and BlueVoyant webinar, Defend Your Business and Extended Ecosystem, a Modernized Approach. Today's webinar should be about 55 minutes in length. We're broadcasting the webinar through Teams live event and is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. Participation in the webinar indicates your consent to being included in the recording. The recording of the webinar and presentation deck will be available to you within 7 to 14 days. If you joined us without completing the registration form, please do so to receive the recording. The registration link is posted in the chat window. Should you have questions for the presenters or need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right side of your screen. We have experts standing by to answer your questions throughout the session. In addition, thank you in advance for adhering to the Microsoft Digital Code of Conduct that is posted in the chat window. With that, Richard, I'll turn it over to you.
That's great, thank you. Hello everybody, I am Richard Diver and I work at Microsoft Security, and one of my roles, my main role, is to help our partners learn and develop new systems. I am very glad to be joined today by Micah and Robert from BlueVoyant. Micah, do you want to say hi?
Sure, thanks very much, Richard. We're grateful for the opportunity to contribute today. I'm one of the solution directors at BlueVoyant in the Microsoft expertise. Go ahead, Robert.
Hi, Micah. Hi, Richard, and good afternoon, evening, everyone. I'm Robert Hannigan, Chairman of the international part of BlueVoyant, based here in London, England. Great to be with you.
Excellent, thank you very much. So in this discussion, what we're going to talk about, we're going to find out a little bit about what BlueVoyant's doing in this space. So I'll give you a bit of context from the Microsoft side. What we're seeing really happening, and we can say over the last couple of years, but it's really been happening for a very long time, is things like the digital transformation. We know that especially in the last couple of years, more and more companies have been forced into having to take on a different approach to the way they do business. For good and bad, they found new ways to operate with a different kind of workforce. There's certainly new businesses opening all the time, mergers and acquisitions. We also know that the decentralization, shadow IT used to be a bigger problem that we used to talk about all the time because it was a new thing, and now it's almost every day shadow IT can be an issue. And one of the really important ones I want to talk about is obviously talent shortage. There isn't a shortage of enabling people to become talented, but availability of hiring them and then keeping them and making sure their skills stay relevant. As soon as you have more relevant skills, you also have an opportunity to go get a new job and move on, which I'd encourage everybody in a career to keep moving on. But that actually makes it really hard as a company to keep hold of your own security teams all the time. So when that happens and then your business changes, really need a way to understand what is changing inside of my business and around my business, what's coming next. Then we think about IoT, one of my favorite topics. IoT is a real enabler for many companies. And one of the products I love at the minute is Defender for IoT. And that is coming out, and we're seeing huge popularity in it because more businesses are taking on IoT as part of everyday business, not just as a specialized niche, but something that they almost can't live without in some industries. And so that brings another level of security issues and concerns where they have to worry about how am I going to manage not only what I can control, but some of these devices are run by third parties. And so this brings us into the conversation of the third party supply chain. What we encourage is to think about your approach holistically. So with more and more of our customers heading towards either the Microsoft 365 Defender, part of their E5 suite, maybe they're in Azure, and extending cloud through to other platforms like AWS and Google Cloud Platform, that security isn't distributed across all those platforms. You want to secure each one of them, but centralization and visibility, that's why we have Microsoft Sentinel. Again, one of my favorite topics. I did get to write a book on it once upon a time. I don't get to work with it every day anymore, but I think Microsoft Sentinel is one of those technologies that a lot of SOC teams are aware of. And if they're not currently using it today, they're thinking about how it can either add or replace the system for the future. So this life cycle, this ability to bring data in, look at the data, act on the data is really important. What that leads us to, though, is that your attack surface is more complex and dynamic than it has ever been before. And unfortunately, I don't think that's going to change. The idea of I'm now done, I'm secure, I don't have to do anything else, Unless you have an unlimited budget and the biggest security team in the world, you're constantly fighting the balances between how much can I achieve with what I have, and when do I need to call out for help? When do I need to engage a partner to come and assist me with this? Because there's certain things you might not want to do on a day-to-day basis, or you don't have the skills for, or like I've already said, you can't find them in the industry because they're still developing. So with that, what I'd like to do is hand over now to Robert, and he's going to talk a little bit about, well, a lot about, I hope, what BlueVoyant's doing in this space. Over to you, Robert.
Yeah, thanks very much, Richard. And I thought those were great points and great context for this discussion, especially on the visibility and the skills problems. I'm just going to do a very quick overview of BlueVoyant. As you said, we're a partner. We're really proud to be a gold partner of Microsoft. We also, by the way, won the MISA top MDR team in the world this year. It's a long pandemic, and I'm sure Michael will talk about that. But we've worked with a range of companies. I guess a couple of years ago, though, we realized just how awesome what Microsoft was building, the stack they had on offer, and Michael's going to explore some of that in a minute. BlueVoyant itself is a US-based company, started 4 years ago, and as you'll see here, it's drawn a lot of people from government and put them together with some brilliant private sector background industry guys. And the reason for the government footprint, I guess, is twofold. One is we found it really useful way of looking at things with an attacker's mindset, looking at the ways in. That's what a lot of these people have done in the past. And I myself spent 20 years in the UK government, so I ended up running GCHQ, Director of GCHQ, which is the UK's equivalent to the NSA. We work very closely with the NSA. And I set up our National Cybersecurity Centre, which I guess is the equivalent of CISA. And again, we worked really closely with CISA. The other thing I think, though, that the government tech expertise has brought us is an understanding of the richness of the data out there on the internet. So we would have called metadata in the SIGINT world, of what you can get from that, but looking at companies and organizations from the outside without access to the internal. And I think those two things really makes it particularly valuable to have, especially people from the FBI and NSA involved in this company. And we've grown to about, getting on for 500 people now from a handful 4 years ago with clients, hundreds of clients in all the continents. I won't talk more about the company, but we'll touch on what we do as we go through. We're looking forward to kind of exploring the whole, what you call holistic, Richard, this internal and external view of cyber threats.
It's a very interesting background. Thanks for sharing that. What are the kind of market shifts that you are seeing across customers where it's causing them to have to think about this, maybe a different approach, the way that they configure and monitor and mitigate?
I'll jump in and cover what we think the first half of that is, and then we'll hand it over to you, Robert. I think that we're trying to tell, as a partner of Microsoft and as an MSSP, a very straightforward story. And that is really just one of internal and external security, to Robert's point. So organizations that are looking to transition away from what was otherwise a really strong 10, 15, 20-year dependency on perimeter fencing on-prem, as they've continued to transition workforce to the cloud and to third-party platforms, there's some concern about being able to protect internal assets as they traverse the internet, intranets, and otherwise that aren't necessarily on-prem anymore. So that's the first part of the story. Is one of the things that you should be looking for in a service provider as you're looking to perhaps augment or replicate or just outright replace or move into a different kind of cloud-first future in terms of your security operations center, the managed detection and response services. And we really want to highlight how Microsoft security stack has enabled us to provide meaningful outcomes and genuinely drive value for our customers in that space. Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Micah. And I think on your point, Richard, about what are customers finding, I think it's exactly that. Even if they get the left-hand side of this challenge right, so they're doing really well on internal security, and that's a tough challenge in itself. They've begun to realize that over the last few years that there is a whole ecosystem out there which represents a threat to them. All the companies, vendors, suppliers who are connected to their supply chain represents some risk, and getting visibility of that and trying to assess it and then actually do something about it, I guess, is what we're all about, in the same way that you would go through those processes for your own networks. And what we're doing is using that data out there on the internet, so 40 plus data sets in our case. We're processing massive amounts of data, I think last count, over 4 billion cyber events a month. We're looking at hundreds of thousands of companies from the outside every day and doing it in real time. With that kind of processing power and those kinds of analytics, you could do you can't see everything, you can never see everything, but you can do some incredibly sophisticated analysis of email security, of IT hygiene, which is, as you know, I mean, is the cause of so many breaches, of exposure to vulnerabilities, which I know we're going to come back to, and then adversarial threats and actual malicious activity, actual breaches that we can see. So there's a real richness there. And of course, this has hit the headlines in the last couple of years, especially with those really big vulnerabilities and the breaches that went with them. And we've all heard about the F5 and the SolarWinds and the Kaseya, and these are things that have even got to the boardroom. And I think the surveys over the last couple of years have shown us that not only is every company getting an attack through the supply chain, experiencing that, but attackers, whether nation state or more importantly criminal groups, are just finding this the attack vector of choice, because for two reasons really. One is, as you harden your own defenses, as you get better at the stuff Micah was talking about, attackers don't just give up and say, okay, I'll go down an honest living. They find a softer way in. And the soft way in is through poorly defended supply chain companies who may not have the resources or the skills, as you said, Richard, to actually defend themselves and therefore you. And the other thing, of course, is if you can get into the right supplier, you have access to a massive range of customers who you wouldn't normally get to. So what's not to like really for an attacker? And the way we've approached this, I think, hasn't really reflected the nature of cyber risk. So cyber risk is different from other risks that boards face in a couple of ways. One is that it's not static and it's highly dynamic. Our own networks are changing all the time. What we do with them is changing all the time. And the attackers are changing all the time, and vulnerabilities are being published, which they can capitalize on all the time. So the whole thing is static, is dynamic, and therefore a static approach isn't going to work. If you take a snapshot once, it's going to be wrong almost by definition within days, maybe hours. And so we started looking at supply chains a few years back, really through questionnaires, which was self-marking. We asked people, did they have the right policies in place? Now, everybody has a patching policy, but actually, what matters is, are they implementing it? They're getting it right. And obviously, you can pen test, you can go and do some intrusive work with permission for a tiny percentage of your supply chain. But that's the other problem of cyber risk, it's scale. So the average number of vendors in a certainly UK company supply chain is over 1,000. It's even higher in the US. It's got higher in the pandemic because we're all looking for extra suppliers in this period. And so scale is a huge problem. How do you look at that number of vendors, and how do you tier them into risks? Because if you ask people about their normal dependencies in supply chain, they'll say, well, my top tier of vendors is the ones I spend the most on, who are critical to my business processes. In fact, with cyber, the attack may come through some small company in tier 54 that you've never heard of, and that most of your company have never heard of, and some of your company may not even know you use as a supplier. And one of the things we find when we apply that massive data to the outside of a company to footprint it is we discover for the company connections to supply chain vendors they didn't know they had. So it's a really interesting real-time look at what your connections really are beyond the kind of procurement and compliance look. And so over time in the middle here, we've developed this idea of using external data, and some of the scoring companies have done great work here really. The problem with this is assessing somebody's risk doesn't actually reduce it. And I guess if you look at the purple bit in the center here, that's the really heavy lifting, the tough bit. If you say to, we've got a customer with about 15,000 vendors. If we said to it, here are 15,000 scoring reports, see what you can do with them. That is no use to a busy, even a highly skilled cyber team. They can't cope with it. How do you get value out of that? you need to prioritize. You need to say what's the stuff that is really, really important against your risk thresholds, and then what can you actually do about it? So how can you take assessment through to remediation? I think one of the big themes that crosses both the internal and the external, I know Micah will talk about, is remediation. Moving from, it's the MDR really for the external space. How do you move from assessing the risk and kind of admiring it, how complex it is, to actually doing something and reducing it? And I guess that's what we're trying to do, and have done very successfully with some very large clients in the US and elsewhere. And just to summarize it really, and I'll pass on to you, Micah, I think what we call a risk operations center is borrowed very clearly from the SOC. So our ROCs work closely with our SOCs, and the ROC's job is to do for the external ecosystem what the SOC is doing internally, and to put the two together. And let me give you a kind of very topical example. We've been doing some work during the pandemic here in the UK for some public hospitals on behalf of a government client. And in that case, they said to us, we don't want everything. We don't want you to tell us what all the problems in hospital X is. We just want to make sure they don't fall over through ransomware during the pandemic, and that their supply chain doesn't cause them to. That's the thing we care about. And going to a hospital, particularly the pandemic, and telling them they've got a poor score or they've got 650 things they could fix is completely useless. So instead, because they've probably got one guy doing IT altogether, maybe, and his job also covers security. So instead, you can go and be specific and say, look, we know a lot about ransomware, or we know what the vectors for delivery are. We know it's about Windows Remote Management, it's about SMB, it's about RDP ports left open. And you all on this call know what those vectors are. If we can go and say, not just you've got a problem, but these ports are open, they need to be closed, or this needs to be patched, and here's the patch. And then to finish this slide, once you've done all that, to actually check it's been done. So instead of having a compliance tick box where somebody says, yeah, I've done all this, to actually be able to look at it and say, well, have they actually applied this patch? And if not, why not? And then go back to the client. So it does parallel very closely what Micah's doing on the internal side with the SOC. And we have deliberately copied a lot of the automation and a lot of the concepts and approach that we use with Microsoft on the internal space, which is maybe a good point to move on.
That's really cool. Thank you. It's really interesting to see that shift. You're right. I think being compliant isn't secure, but you still have to be compliant. You can't do it all, so you prioritize based on risk. And buying another product isn't always the answer either, right? It's not always just about, can I get another product to do this for me and it'll tell me all my answers. I think the approach of having expertise sounds like a really good thing. So what is it that really made BlueVoyant decide to kind of modify your managed services and start to incorporate something like external third-party supply chains and threats, instead of just looking at what has been normal in the past of the customer's own infrastructure and looking internally only? Why the shift to external?
Well, I'll hand over to Micah, but I think the shift came from customers. So we were working in those early days 4 years ago with a lot of customers of different sizes, from some of the largest in the world, largest automotive, and the largest financial services, through to medium-sized companies. And we were developing some really clever products, for example, to spot domain lookalikes, and to tackle the trickbot problem in financial services, for example, and using that external data. And it was all great, and we're still doing it. But they came back to us and said, look, what we're really worried about is supply chain. Can you do something about that? Not just to measure the risk, but to reduce it. And it was from that, and from what we learned about automation in the internal, in the MSS space, that we built this. And as you say, it's really about how do you make those skills available to a wide range of customers at scale, because that's what people really need. And I think it ties in very nicely with Micah's work on the internal space.
I like this question, Richard. I think the genesis of what we refer to as our modern SOC offering is really the idea that we want to provide a modern service. And as Robert was talking, his comment that assessment of risk doesn't mean resolution of risk. I just had this kind of funny little daydream about how you go to the fair, you go to an amusement park. My little toddler isn't able to ride all of the rides because there's a sign that says you need to be this tall to ride, and he gets really frustrated about it. But the key in that equation is there's a ride operator that's sort of enforcing that rule. And if you don't have an enforcement mechanism in place that carries you through to the resolution, then your end users are just going to get on the ride. You might release, some email as folks are moving to the cloud. They're transitioning their entire, on-prem estate into kind of a digital estate. You send out an email that says, hey, this is the way you need to behave in the cloud from now on. You're a remote user. These are the rules. And if you don't have, the things in place that sort of force and corral users' behavior to good decision making, then you really just have configuration drift. And I think that what we've seen as folks continue to move to the cloud, they move their Exchange, they move their SharePoint, there wasn't necessarily a security-minded approach to that. It wasn't like, hey, if we're going to move the entire sales archive to the cloud, what are the things we should do to ensure that once it's in the cloud doesn't have the ability, to disperse to the wider web or, in other kind of repositories that aren't sanctioned by, our corporate IT staff. And because of that, there is, some hesitancy about how to move forward. You've got, I think, a lot of security-minded folks and IT directors where circumstance kind of forced their hand sort of overnight, right? The past couple of years, they needed to transition everything very quickly and keep folks productive. So what we're sensitive to is folks have that hesitancy. They're not sure, a little bit of paralysis through just constant analysis. The other thing that I'm seeing is as cloud adoption kind of took place, that sort of just increased the vendor watch scenario that Robert's talking about. All of a sudden, we've doubled the amount of folks and platforms that we have to work with in order to keep people online. And that's been a real concern. Folks are looking for strategic opportunities to consolidate the amount of tooling that they have. And we're going to get into why we think Microsoft actually solves that problem for our customers and why we've strategized an entire service offering around the Microsoft security stack. Which leads us nicely into that platform expertise. If we can do some vendor consolidation, then we can sort of ensure that folks internally on our internal SecOps teams have an opportunity to continue to train, continue to master the platform in order to provide more meaningful outcomes and results. The responsiveness that we're seeing as a requirement in the market is pretty extreme. Folks are looking for their service providers to do more, to have more presence in their environment and be sensitive to all of the privacy needs that they have. For instance, the data compliance requirements that they're beholden to from regulatory organizations, and having a service vendor that is providing that kind of programmatic mastery and compliance sensitivity behind the scenes inside of customers' own environments seems to be a big deal. So let's talk about what we mean by modern SOC. I don't want to get too product heavy here, but really we're talking about the Defender stack from Microsoft. Defender for Office, Defender for Cloud Apps, Defender for Cloud, formerly Azure Defender, as well as Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, and then of course Microsoft Sentinel, which Richard brought up earlier. And the reason why we think all of these tools driving in tandem provide the Cadillac of a security experience, because Microsoft has some pretty powerful differentiators from their competition in this space. And part of the reason that they do, and I think a good takeaway for folks that are, want an argument to take back to the drawing board with the wider decision-making crew, is that Microsoft owns more of the platform that is otherwise not available to some of the other best-in-breed tools. And these are tools that probably on their own have an excellent spotlight, can shine things on bad things that they see and say, hey, this isn't a good thing. But what Microsoft has is a continuity of experience across the platform. And I'll quickly explain that. Microsoft owns the operating system, obviously, in Windows and Windows Server, the productivity and collaboration environment in Office 365, and of course, the largest identity tools in Active Directory and Azure Active Directory from on-prem and cloud, respectively. And the way I envision this is sort of like when you have more than one monitor, you've got 2 monitors or 3 monitors, and you're moving your mouse across that separation pane, and it cleanly traverses the threshold, right? And you can see the activity as it moves from one thing to the next. And this is really, I sometimes tell our customers that we are a cybersecurity company first and a Microsoft partner second. It's precisely because Microsoft gives us that holistic XDR, extended detection and response capability across the data, devices, and identity platform that allow us to provide a service that adequately responds to those market shifts that we're looking to be sensitive to. A couple other key takeaways of why this is really a good approach is because our customers own the tooling in their environment. We jumped on the opportunity about 2 years ago, February 2019, when Azure Microsoft Sentinel went public. We are studying it a little bit prior to that in preview because we were really looking for the opportunity to build a solution around a cloud native, fully mature SIEM solution, and that really didn't exist before Microsoft Sentinel. What we're able to do now, because we've been working with Sentinel for so long, I think we're somewhere near about 200 deployments deep now on Microsoft Sentinel and all kind of business demographics, is ensure that all of the work we do is done in our customers' own subscriptions. And that allows us to be really sensitive to the privacy point that we were talking about earlier. As you move things to the cloud, where is my data? Where's my user activity? Where are all the logs being stored for audit and compliance purposes? So let's talk about why this is actually a pretty unique approach to security work in general. I think a traditional MSSP approach to providing that kind of monitoring apparatus as a service, a security operations center 24/7, is to build a really nice backend platform that grabs your data, it extracts your data, it cooks it, in a bit of a voodoo chamber and applies threat intelligence feeds and says, this is a bad thing, and then presents that result to the customer. But there's no peeking behind the curtain. You can't see what the wizardry is there. You don't know what the detections, the correlations, and those alert rules are really doing. You're just trusting, based on reputation or other kinds of scoring that from Forrester or from Gartner, for instance, that the MSSP is really doing the work that you need them to do. What Microsoft allows us to do, and we recognize this very early on, so we didn't just test it, we jumped in with both feet in the Microsoft Sentinel waters, is allow us to do all of that activity that's otherwise behind the curtain directly in front of our customer base. And what I mean by that is there are some things that we do in the back end, but we basically don't take customers' data. We basically extract and review metadata, and then we drop our activity right back into a customer's environment. So that means we're leveraging our customers or our partners' Microsoft Defender for Endpoint portal in order to resolve something happening on an endpoint and really reach in and solve a problem. So for instance, we might see like a process that's an otherwise normal process in the Windows operating system start to generate a little bit strange outbound network activity that isn't normal. We're going to see that because we're watching your Microsoft Sentinel environment, and our SOC analysts have the ability to reach into your tooling and address the concerns on the endpoints that you've given us access to. And Microsoft has made this so easy to make this access very, very precise. If there are pieces of your infrastructure that you don't want us working on, there are role-based access controls and permission policy configuration options that Microsoft allows us to determine before we're in steady state during the deployment phase. We only want you to see these things and have access to these things, at specific times. So the same kinds of access controls that you leverage on your staff internally are extended to our security operations center. We don't have standing privilege in our customers' environments for much more at all than they would ask us to have. One of the challenges that I think we've seen so many times now is, what does the adoption story look like? I've been a little bit hesitant, to just wholly embrace Microsoft security. We're going to piecemeal replace, we're not going to jump all in. We're just going to turn on some things and see if we can kind of do a one-on-one, one-by-one kind of vendor replication effort in Microsoft. And suddenly, what around the round table and the planning table was supposed to be a 3-month exercise turned into a 6, 9, 18-month exercise, and folks haven't fully been able to migrate off of the dependencies that they have on-prem. I want to pause just for a moment because I think we have a question here. It's how is BlueVoyant helping clients who have hybrid SIM and wants to integrate on-prem SIM with cloud SIM, such as Sentinel? This is a great question, and again, I got to give credit to Microsoft for making this really clean. The Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, formerly Microsoft Cloud App Security, has a lot of really good inherent connection capabilities for us to grab SIM solutions that you are otherwise using on-prem. We won't go through all of those SIM solutions, but whatever it is that you're using on-prem, you can rest assured that Microsoft's made it very convenient and comfortable for us to address this and bring that data into Sentinel for further enrichment. And I'll pause for a moment and just say, I wasn't going to mention this, but for folks that are concerned about moving wholly over to Microsoft, that's not a requirement. Microsoft has what they call the Intelligent Security Graph, where they allow all security vendors to basically build very easy, comfortable connectors through API to bring all of that data into whatever Microsoft tool it is, whether it's Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps or whether it's Azure Active Directory. The ability for you to integrate an on-prem security tool that you've been using successfully for the better part of 5 to 10 years, and third-party security tools, for instance, you've got some third-party content filter that you've been using in the cloud to good success. It's possible to connect all of that into the wider monitoring apparatus and benefit from that XDR story that Richard was talking about. One of the challenges, though, and this is a really good lead-in to this slide, so appreciate that question from you, Norali. One of the challenges is when you just turn these things on, sometimes there's an expectation that you purchase a license or you purchase a subscription, you turn the thing on, and that's it. You set it and forget it. And I see this quite often, for instance, in Microsoft Defender for Office, which is Microsoft's excellent email hygiene as well as collaboration kind of governance tool. Folks continue to see things kind of to come in, or it doesn't quite behave the way that they want it to, but that's because there is some programmatic mastery that's required in order for the tool to address the nuance that you need in your organization. And relying on a partner to help you address that nuance is going to give you increased time to value and reduce your total cost of ownership. We've seen time and time again, organizations say, hey, functionally, Microsoft Sentinel is awesome. We like it a lot. We've seen a number of demos from Microsoft, and we've done our research. We feel like it's the right direction, but when we turned it on, our domain controllers on-prem, our Exchange servers on-prem were generating a lot of noise. We saw such an influx of logs that we really couldn't stay on top of the cost of the subscription. There are a number of built-in techniques that Microsoft provides in order to address this kind of situation in terms of cost governance. And what we do at BlueVoyant is ensure that as we're trimming down those log sources to only the critical security event data, that we're doing so in a way that refines that noise to signal ratio without reducing the value of the alerting. So we talked earlier about having a security operations center from a partner that is well informed on these tools and able to reach in and solve problems. But there is the issue of the deployment phase when you're trying to map out what maximizing the utility of the licenses looks like and what the adoption story looks like. So you get a checklist and a timeline that's something like 4 to 6 weeks to grab all of your disparate sources and your third-party log data, instead of a 4 to 6 month execution effort where you're not fully sure that at the end of that 6 month runway, you're really going to be fully on board. Let's talk about a little bit more, how we do this at scale. To Robert's point earlier, Microsoft is a fantastic product company, has made some amazing tools in the lab, and it is our job to ensure that we drive meaningful outcomes for our customers in the wild. And because we've been working with Sentinel for so long, we've been able to kind of run parallel to Microsoft Sentinel's development. When Sentinel was first released a couple of years ago, there were only a handful, maybe a couple dozen of data connectors, some of the mainstay security technologies and products that you've had on the mantle for years and years in your organization. Well, we had plenty of customers come to us again with the story, we like it, but are we going to be able to grab all of our data? Is it going to be able to ingest everything that we need in a cost-effective way? So throughout the course of the lifecycle of Microsoft Sentinel's development, we've continued to develop our own correlations, alert rules, and our own custom data connectors to either improve on a Microsoft connector that's inherent to Sentinel, or to provide a new one that doesn't exist, in the Microsoft Sentinel natively. But how do we avoid having to do that in every single deployment exercise and keep those delivery timelines down? We developed an entire delivery apparatus behind the scenes, our product backend, if you will, using Azure Functions and Logic Apps, where we centrally store all of our alert rules, our correlations and detections, and we use the Azure Lighthouse capabilities to bridge that environment to our customer's environment during deployment. So we take all of the alert rules that we've developed over time, all of the custom connectors that we've developed over time, and instead of having to manually program them into our customers' environments, because we have that perfectly permissioned, scripted access control through Azure Lighthouse, we can take all of the intellectual property that we've been developing over the years and put it in the hands of our customers. I think we have a good conversation and story to tell here in a moment about why, some of the other reasons why that's really valuable. But just in terms of deployment, having the technology like this that we've continued to build alongside Microsoft's security stack allows us to increase that time to value and bring these things online very quickly. It also means that updating your environment is a pretty seamless activity. So as we see, unfortunately, a splash like the Apache vulnerability that we've seen and some of the other ones that Robert mentioned earlier hit the scene, we design the correlation and the detection here so we can see it, so we know how to find it. We put it in your environment, and then those tools that you have native, the tools that you own from your Microsoft license and subscription, go to work, with the detection kind of logic that we put into place. And as soon as we're able to basically find that within hours. One of the things that's really important, I think, for the decision makers in an organization that don't necessarily have the resources to vet all of this is that single pane of glass. And we continue to hear that as kind of like a catchphrase, like, we need a single pane of glass. Well, we are the single pane of glass. And then you dive into that vendor and it's not really a single pane of glass. Microsoft's done an excellent job over the past 2 years, specifically consolidating a lot of the technologies that operationalize the security stack into a single pane of glass. So I think the entry floor to being able to utilize and operationalize Microsoft's technology is a little bit lower than you might expect, because they've gone to great lengths to put all of these things comfortably together in the security portal. We like to mirror that effort. We know that not all of our customers, not all of our partners, not all organizations are going to have the resources on hand to open the security portal for Microsoft and understand and navigate what's happening, even though it's all comfortably in one place. And furthermore, when your CEO asks you, hey, you cut a check to Microsoft, you cut a check to BlueVoyant, show me the value that we're getting out of that relationship, you're not necessarily going to send them to the Azure portal and say, well, go ahead and see for yourself. Even though all of our SOC analysts are recording every single piece of their activity back in our customers' environment, so you can see everything that we're doing directly in your own Microsoft Sentinel log, as well as the other tools. We also make it convenient for you to get in touch with the SOC or to have a dialogue with a SOC escalation tech on maybe like a false positive that we registered and recorded back into Microsoft Sentinel, and you want to know a little bit more about it. Or you just want to generate reports that show the cross-functional relationship between the world that Robert was talking about in evaluating and monitoring external risk with everything that's happening internally in your organization, and generate reports that consolidate that data and provide a really nice, polished, mature a reporting output that you could give to one of your executives or board members or perhaps investors that want to see, what are we really doing to secure the investment that we're making in our organization, which I think is pretty important. So we call that our wavelength portal, and it's just a place where it's another place for you to see everything that in our ambition for full transparency, the things that we're doing. And I think that's a good opportunity for us to kind of segue into the next stage of this.
Yeah, I think it's really good to see the success you're having. I know I've spent the last couple of years helping several partners get to this state, but to see that you've got so many customers enjoying the fruits of the labor is awesome. Now, I don't think we're talking about replacing staff, right? It's a case of the technology is really good. It can solve a lot of problems, but it doesn't do it all on its own, and it does need experts to help. Really, what I think it does is it helps the experts you do have to achieve more with the time they have. They don't get more than 24 hours in a day. As you know, staying up 24 hours in a day is not a lot of fun, especially with new babies around. So in your terms, what would you say is really the benefit to any customer, whether they have a strong team, a small team, a single person operation? Like, what is the benefits of having a partner helping with the kind of adoption and operation of the Microsoft security play?
Yeah, I think a good way to answer this question, Richard, is to just simply tell a story. And with Microsoft in mind, I mentioned earlier, kind of signpost, that the deployment methodology that we have for keeping our customers' environments updated is really key. It is true, we offer kind of a professional service to stand these technologies up, or harden them with best practice configuration if you have the tech but haven't done that exercise. But the ongoing maintenance and monitoring of your tool set is critical. It feels like every single weekend there is a new global exploit. There is something that's going to destroy essentially the productivity of your entire organization, depending on how large your dependency is on whatever the exploit is attacking.
It's like a squirrel moment, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like this Jenga.
Yeah, had all your plans set ready for what you're going to achieve in the next couple of weeks to modernize your own security, and then suddenly the Apache vulnerability comes up and sideswipes your entire. I expect people are still working on it today. But yeah, so yeah, sorry, carry on.
No, you're good. That's exactly right. It's Jenga, because you had a plan about which pieces you were going to pull and replace, and then vulnerability came and knocked over your tower. So you might remember the Hafnium vulnerability that was caught, I think, late spring, which basically was a remote shell that was living on Exchange servers for some period of time. Microsoft blogs found it pretty quickly, alerted essentially the entire world and said, this is how you find it, and this is potentially a good remediation path. We appreciate that Microsoft does this kind of legwork. It is our job, and our customers depend on us as a security provider to confirm that that's true. Is that really how you detect it? If I do these remediation steps, am I actually going to be able to pull it off? Because otherwise, Richard, the option is for your own internal staff that are probably just perfectly precisely staffed based on ticket quota measurements that have taken place over the past 12 years. So suddenly, for you to expect someone in the organization, if you don't have a dedicated SecOps team, to go confirm that Microsoft research and go perform the remediation of the vulnerability is sometimes a 24/7 exercise where you just stay on a incident response bridge until it's solved. And that is not a comfortable way to deliver security outcomes for your organization. So I'll tell a quick story here, and I'll let Robert have the mic to kind of round us out on it. That Hafnium vulnerability had really great detection research that was available to the wider cybersecurity community, but because of the way that we deploy our solution directly into customers' environments, we were able to confirm that those detections were accurate, develop some custom correlations around those detection IOCs, indicators of compromise, and put them in that delivery portal that's connected with individual lighthouse bridges to our customers' environments. So our customers basically had Hafnium detections within just a couple of hours. And alongside our customer services team, reaching out to proactively inform CISOs, folks that maybe didn't even know that this was happening, because depending on where they were in the world and which time zone they were in, letting them know, hey, we see it, we're working on it. Your organization in particular, there's a high likelihood of that you're affected because we are connected to your Exchange server with Defender for Endpoint, for instance, and we have the ability to confirm based on the logs that we're seeing that there's these IOCs Microsoft has found for us. So to more succinctly answer your question or recap on that point, Richard, having proactive communication from a partner that you can hand over to an exec who's going to come first thing in the morning and say, hey, I just saw this on CNN, what are we doing about it? Or that came over the Cyberwire. that's a big deal, and you're going to look like you made a really smart decision in your service relationship. And then the last piece of that is Microsoft has so many checks and balances before patches are allowed to be released. The one-click to run tools that Microsoft releases for a lot of vulnerabilities, that are impacting Microsoft technology, run very well, but sometimes it takes a while for those to get out in the wild. And our customers are not waiting for that 15-day spin cycle on a patch in some cases, and that was the case with the Hafnium vulnerability. They're looking to us to immediately give them an outcome. And because of the way that we're connected to our customers' environment and the solution is deployed against our customers, it's their own tools, we have the ability to perform those remediations pretty quickly and then do follow-up exercises, well before that 15-day cycle hits. And I think that's the key. If there are some folks who are hesitant about outsourcing any of the remediation because they own their environment, Richard, we have the ability to perform what you might call co-management, where somebody who's interested says, I've got a SecOps team, we want to manage all of this, we need you to manage this. So it's not an all or nothing, go behind our black box solution. It's, hey, bring your SOC to us, this is what we want you to do, and this is when we want you to do it.
Right. True partnership, not outsourcing. Right.
It's interesting.
Your jobs are safe. We're not here to take your job. We're here to help you.
That's right.
Good, Robert.
No, that's dead right. I mean, it is about focusing busy teams, not replacing them. But it's interesting you mentioned, Mike, the Microsoft takeover, their patches, and I was just reading on a blog about the patches for Apache, being suspect or allegedly suspect. So it is a great point, and one of the reasons why I think you need to rush something out on the detection side even before the official patch is ready. I'll just round off what you say, Micah, because I think this is the bit that clients get very excited about because they don't know it's possible. As you say, when a vulnerability hits the headlines, most don't, but when it does, the first thing happens is the CEO rings the CISO and says, are we exposed to SolarWinds? And everybody rushes around, wasting a lot of that time that you're talking about, Richard, finding out what their exposure is. And you'd hope that a good team will know that, and in the way that you've just described, Micah, can put a fix in quickly if they've got that expertise on hand. But then the question is, so how many of our supply chain are exposed to this? And that's a really hard thing to answer if you don't have an automated response using the kind of data and analytics that we've got externally and created in the same kind of timeline as you see here as the internal that you just described, Micah. Because otherwise what you have to do is you go through your procurement details, you go to your compliance people, you maybe contact as many of your suppliers as you know about and say, look, are you exposed? They may not know. That process is massively time consuming and incomplete and could go on forever. If you can do it, as you see here, within a few hours. And we had one client in the US with 31,000 financial services, 31,000 vendors in their organization, and they needed to know very quickly, and we could tell them, as you can see, within hours, how many of their vendors were actually exposed, because not everybody's exposed, and not every vendor who is exposed really matters. So it's back to prioritization. But knowing at the start, having the visibility is the key starting point, and then triaging that down through prioritization, and then doing something about it, as you see at the end here, using the Risk Operations Center to actually contact those clients who are affected that need to do something urgently. That's what makes a difference. That's what actually reduces the risk to you through your supply chain, rather than just kind of admiring it, as you were saying earlier. So I think it's a nice example of the power of putting the internal and the external together, and the single pane visibility that gives you, and the ability to actually then go and do something about it. So I'll stop there, Richard.
No, that's a great answer. I think that risk and prioritization is two of the key factors that I've had to deal with over my career. Not every security and IT team want to take risk, right? So very risk averse, and zero risk is their ideal policy. Whereas the business can sometimes be willing to accept more risk than it should, depending on, I think it's communication. It's knowing how serious is this risk? How likely is this risk? And then that tells you how much you should prioritize putting effort into it. I know of many security professionals that are frustrated after a long career still facing some of the same issues we were facing 5 and 10 years ago, because they weren't able to maybe communicate and convince why this problem right now is the most important thing I should focus my time on, not that other thing that's in my list of to-dos from a long time ago. So with that, there is a question that came in as well about the single pane of glass. Now, I'll have a go at answering it from my perspective first, but I would also be interested to see how you're tackling it. There has never been a single pane of glass ever, and I'm not sure that ever will be a complete one, because the mindset of what a single pane of glass is different for everybody. That's my opinion in it. The reason why I say that is because what I would think I would mean by a single pane of glass is, as an operator who needs to get in and get my job done, I want to be able to do it as seamlessly and smoothly as possible. The screen is going to change, but within the context of I don't have to log out and log in. I don't have to change the UI and the interface and the language I'm using. A lot of single pane to me means I can quickly get to what I need without having to remember a whole bunch of stuff, which is really important when we're training up a new generation of security experts as well. If they have to support 30 to 40 different products, which the average last year in a study was about 87 products from 50 different vendors in security, trying to learn all of them is nigh impossible. That's when you end up with experts in 1 or 2 products. So the nearest we can get to single pane means it looks and feels very similar. The data and information is very similar. And if I click on the link in one product, it takes me to the next product and lands me where I need to be. That to me is a single pane. But Micah, what would you say are the benefits or challenges around getting to single pane?
Oh, I think that's it. Truly, simply to restate that, it's a very fine balance. We want our operations to have a comfortable experience without sacrificing the capabilities of the tools because we've made the environment too simple, or we did a focus group that said this is what people look at most of the time. Well, we need access to this other thing some of the time. We can't consolidate it and fold it in on itself indefinitely. But I do think that Microsoft's approach to this in the unified security portal is genuinely driving dividends for folks that are just trying to get up to speed and build capabilities around the investments that they've made in Microsoft products.
Cool. One of the other questions that's come in is around about, I suppose it's the trepidation or the responsibility factor that, especially as we see more and more things like external risk and third party, that's generally outside of the realms of your everyday security requirements inside of a company. So taking the fact that a company themselves has their own, they own everything, 100%, they have to manage and secure and protect their environment. When they think about coming to a partner, it's not too irresponsible to hand over some of that to the partner, right? So what is the, and Robert, maybe this is one for you, is what is the level of responsibility that you can hand over to a partner versus what maybe you should keep yourselves? Where's that balance?
I think it's a great question, Richard, and it's interesting being here in the UK. I think, we are slightly behind the debate in the US. We're slightly behind on cloud adoption generally, but we are behind the debate on how much you can outsource and what you let go, if you like. But I think the answer, and I don't know whether you'd agree, Micah, is you need to have some concern. It's a good thing to have concern about outsourcing and what you're letting go. And I think in the way that Mike has described, particularly the use of Sentinel, and it's true also for supply chain, you're not just handing stuff over and never seeing it again. It's got to be intelligent outsourcing, and there may be some stuff you never want to hand over to others, and Sentinel allows you to do that. So I think it's a mixed picture, but some worry is not a bad thing, and doing this incrementally and doing it with expert consultancy and advice, not just kind of buying the product out of the box and hoping for the best, it seems to me to be the right answer. Do you agree with that, Michael?
I do. You're never going to know what you can automate in your environment until you talk to a partner. So we speak to a lot of organizations that are facing reputational pains. Things are taking us a really long time. We have manual tasks. Our teams don't wear the SecOps hat 4 out of 5 days. They wear it 4 hours a day on Friday, and there's all these manual and nightly tasks that need to be reviewed and done. And it's possible to automate quite a lot of that. And you will never know what kind of the ways that you can free up your existing staff to do their day jobs until you speak to a partner. I think that maybe a good way to kind of round this out is the ability to turn the ability to quickly leverage these tools is there for you. So you can turn the licenses on. We could spin up a Microsoft Sentinel environment for you to appreciate real value pretty much right away, and it wouldn't take long at all. The real fine crafting here is responding to the nuances in your organization in meaningful ways. We don't just want to turn these things on. We want to listen to your story, understand where that posture maturity level is at, and then enhance it, enrich it, augment it. Take those 9-month timelines and reduce them down to 4 to 6 weeks, and at a very least, give you a sense of what your adoption timelines could look like if you're not ready, to embrace the full fledgling stack. So I think that's a good place for me to close. Richard, I really appreciated the opportunity today to kind of review some of this. I would encourage anyone that's listening now or in the future to reach out to Richard or Robert or I on LinkedIn, even if it's just to have an academic conversation about some of these things. I like to moonlight as like an endpoint manager, vigilante answer giver on Reddit sometimes as well when I can't sleep. So happy to have discussions with anyone that would like to. And back to you, Richard.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Micah and Robert, for your insights. It's been really interesting to hear your approach to this. And I think it'll be new for a lot of our audience is to think about the ecosystem and think about the third-party supply chain. So thank you all for your questions and your time. And with that, we'll close. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Robert.
That's great. Thank you, Robert and Micah, for the great presentation, and to Richard for moderating. Thank you to everyone who attended. We value your feedback to help us improve future events like this and welcome your input on the information shared today. So thank you for submitting a short survey, both on the screen and posted in the chat window. This concludes today's webinar. And again, thank you for joining. We hope everyone has a great rest of the day.